Welcome back to Off the Record, the Real Talk podcast. And I'm your host, Allie Braswell. It's a pleasure to be here with you again. And you know that if it's 6 o'clock on a Wednesday, it's time for Off the Record. I'm excited to be here, but if you've been with us throughout the Voices of Leadership series, thank you for continuing the journey. Today's episode is different as there's no guest with me today. This is going to be a personal reflection. I wanted to share that sometimes leadership conversations can only be told in the first person. When you think about what we're going through in our current environment, in the narrative, it really takes courage to lead when there is tough things going on in the background. So one of the things I wanted to talk about with you here is, what does it take when courage is required of you? When the right decision isn't the easy one? What does it take to do that? How do we put that together? How do we have that voice of courage? The courage that is most talked about in traits of leadership, but it's also one of the most misunderstood. Courage isn't loud, it isn't reckless, and it isn't about being fearless. Courage is about conviction. What you're willing to stand for, and when it would be easier to just stay silent. When I think about it and really start to try to define it, courage in leadership is when courage shows up in moments that don't make headlines. It shows up when you make the right decision instead of the popular one. When you protect your people instead of positions. It's so important that when you take that responsibility on, we do the right thing. John C. Maxwell loves to say that right decisions for the right reasons. Because sometimes it takes that leader to have that ability to have that foresight of what's coming in making that decision and then making sure that you put your people first. I'm very strongly a proponent of people first cultures and leaders that lead on the high road, as John would say. When you take responsibility instead of assigning blame, it's courage that is what you do when you do that. When you're able to step out and put yourself first in front of your troops, or whether it be your employees or your coworkers, but you're the leader of that organization, it's really taking a moment to say, I'm going to be held accountable and take the courage to lead, because it's very easy to take the easy road out and not lead. But sometimes in doing that, it takes a lot of strength, a lot of internal strength. What we talked about in episode 1 with Brigadier General retired Daphne Davis is, what is that inner within confidence that allows you to go ahead and make a difference, that allows you to go ahead and make that tough decision with the information that you have. Courage is what you do when no one's clapping. I think about it in that a lot of people want to stand up and lead. There's a question out there sometimes that you have to ask is, why do you want to lead? What is the purpose? It should be about taking and helping others to achieve great things. In the Marine Corps, they used to define leadership as the ability to inspire people to go off and achieve a common goal. Well, I think we take it one step further and say that courage is that key ingredient that allows you to be able to have the confidence to look out for the other people that are in your charge or that are assigned to your organization. Throughout my career, from the Marine Corps to corporate leadership to community work, I've learned that courage often costs something. And it may cost comfort. It may cost approval. And sometimes it may cost relationships. But what it gives back is integrity. Integrity is built long before it's recognized. A lot of the times, what you'll see is that leaders often have that ability to lead and get things done, but it takes a lot of integrity to do it consistently and make sure that sustained leadership over time. As I think about it and talking with you through it, it's where are we choosing comfort over leadership? I can remember when it takes courage to hear the hard truth. And that hard truth is that because they lack skill, sometimes they fail in leadership. Because they avoid discomfort, they make the popular decision. But courage versus leadership is they prioritize peace over progress. But courage requires movement. Even when the path isn't clear, we have to sometimes take a step forward and make that decision and say, who's watching how you lead when no one is applauding? I think about it that it comes down to a single decision sometimes, a decision that asks what's right, not what's easy. I think about one of the things I really enjoy in John C. Maxwell's book, a book I'm reading, High Road Leadership. I encourage you to go out and get it. As a Maxwell certified leadership and trainer, I use it a lot, actually putting together a workshop. That's why it's so prevalent in my mind, is that it's very easy to say I'm the leader. It's another thing to lead when you got people counting on you to make the right decision. And sometimes, as long as that decision is the right thing to do, it not always is easy. It's not the easy path forward. It takes a little bit of, like I said, courage, intestinal fortitude to make that right decision and decide to lead in the right direction, when it would be easier just to fall back and say, well, we'll do what's popular. I can recall making decisions in corporate where one time at the Urban League, we had to end up cutting salaries. We had to take a 5% pay cut across the board. And that was a very tough decision because I knew I was affecting households. I knew I was affecting income. But we needed to make that tough decision so we could right the ship and begin to move forward. And we moved forward. And guess what? The great thing about it is we made the right decision early enough that later on we were able to restore and even give raises, restore that 5% cut, and then bring it back to making them whole. And then later on within that next year, be able to give them raises because we were able to sustain our organization. It was a tough decision, folks. It wasn't the popular decision. Boy, did I hear, I didn't care. I wasn't putting people first. I only was looking out for myself. But when I took time to explain why I made the decision and set the standard for where we were going and help them understand along the way and to be vulnerable enough to say, how it impacted me. People will follow you if they believe that you have some skin in the game. And I think that's where it takes that courage, is to be vulnerable enough to allow them to see the real person. It's stepping into your humanness. I really think that when we look about it, the teams that I've been able to build and see them thrive, it was always about putting my people first. I can remember one of the leadership things that I did that I really embraced and hope that you will too, is when there's an opportunity to showcase your talented team members, take that step back as the leader and allow them to present to the senior leadership. Take that opportunity that if they have an idea that needs to be taken up, let them be the carrier to take it up. Be their sponsor in the room. Help them to achieve. I truly believe that when we help others achieve, we'll get there too. It's about putting other people first and that people first culture attitude that allows us to do it. And in order to be able to do that, that's what takes courage. For those watching me lead, I hope that I give the examples that they feel can see the character of the person that I am. A lot of times people are one thing in front of the camera and they're another thing behind the scenes. I think it takes courage to maintain that consistency of being who you are when you're on stage, as well as who you are when you're off and you're interacting with your people. We've heard many a story about the persona that you see versus the person that they are. And I hope you'll be the type of truly inspirational leader that'll model the right behaviors, model the vulnerability, model the character strengths that will help to take your people to the next level. And that's really what this whole Voice of Leadership series is all about. From the time that we spent with Daphne Davis talking about the voice from within, to where we transitioned to General Edmondson, and he was talking truly about how to move an organization forward, to the servant leader in Reginald B. McGill, who talked about the voice of service, to when we had General Gary Brito come in and really talk about the spirit of innovation, the leadership, innovation, and transformation. When you're taking organizations from point A to point Z, and the spirit of leadership that it takes in order to get people moving and motivated to go off and accomplish the mission. You know, I was so glad to have on most recently as well, around the spirit of collaboration, Judith Smelzer of Central Florida Public Media, and have her share their story about how they brought people in the same room that were often seen as their competition in the media space. And that modeling vulnerability, she talked about that it was uncomfortable at first, but it was the right decision. She had the courage to make the right decision. And I think you'll see in our next episode, which will be the final episode in this season on the Voice of Leadership, when General Gwen Bingham talks about legacy and leading with the end in mind, leading with making a difference, that you're empowering people to grow into the future leaders that when you transition, you know the organization's in a great place. I think when you reveal the character behind that person leading, and they take ownership and have the accountability, it means owning the outcome. And sometimes when it goes wrong, you have to step up and say, you know what, team, we didn't make it, and I'll take the bad on that one. I tell you, when that has happened to me and we missed the mark in some of the leadership roles that I've had on a goal or an objective, by my taking the accountability, I found my team wrapped themselves around me and said, we won't fail again the next time out. We'll come together and we'll get it done. And we come up with innovative ideas. And I think that's built by also showcasing them and not me coming in and explaining it away. You know, owning it, whether it's successful or it failed, is an important part of leadership. It shows the integrity that it takes in order to be able to lead. As I said before, integrity is built long before it's recognized, long before it shows up, long before it comes out in the wash, so to speak. You know, when I think about this is, it's not shifting the blame. It's not hiding behind the process or the policy. Leaders with courage say, I own this. That kind of ownership builds trust, and trust is the foundation of every healthy organization. I think when you look at whether you're leading a small group or you're leading a multi-million-dollar organization or multi-billion-dollar organization, yes, our listeners range in from young business startup to seasoned leader. I think it takes that type of courage, and that's what it takes to take us to the next level, to make that difference. And when you look at it, courage isn't just professional, it's personal. It shows up in conversations when we've been avoiding. In boundaries, we need to set. In relationships, we need to repair or release. Sometimes leading with courage means being honest with yourself. You know, I had the opportunity to observe most recently a leader in a subordinate interaction where the leader was kind of talking off the cuff. And I wondered what type of leader he would fall into if you were mapping him to the 3 roads of leadership that John Maxwell talks about in his book. Again, I'm referring to it a lot because I'm buried into the midst of reading it again as I prepare to do some work with an organization on high road leadership. But when I looked at it, I assessed that he was middle road leadership at best, but unfortunately trending towards low road leadership. And let me share why. When you think about middle road leaders, these are the people who have great skills, but they manipulate for their own benefit most of the time, and not necessarily promotion of others. And low road leaders totally are looking out for themselves. Some of the statements he made about a colleague to a subordinate would cause division. It would cause mistrust of the other colleague. And it wasn't what a leader should be doing. Instead of promoting the entire organization forward on the concepts that he was sharing, he was belittling the other leader in order to promote himself. And I thought, wow, this is an excellent example of someone that needs to really be aspiring to high road leadership. And what would that look like in this situation? To have given kudos to the person in the beginning, not as a slight later on in the conversation. To say the projects they were working on, while it was different from their team, and they may want to approach it differently, wouldn't it have been great to celebrate the success that they had and then model and say, hey, when we do ours, we want to probably emulate some of the things that they did. We may do it differently, but isn't it great to see that this person was successful, that we had another colleague in the organization achieving great success around some of the things that we thought, and maybe even offer that we can use their success as we can begin to lay a foundation for our success. See, leadership takes courage, also choosing to do the right thing and for the right reasons, and not just doing a thing because it's easy to do. So I hope that helps you see that one of the things that I think what we need to really do, and I encourage you to read the book. If you're a leader listening to my voice, not that I get anything off the book sales, I don't. But when I see something really good, I want to give it its due. And if you take time and you read through and learn from the 12 chapters of High Road Leadership, I know you're going to be the type of leader that leads with courage, that leads with care, that leads with competency, that leads with empathy, an understanding of how to push others up. Because I guarantee you, if you move your team up, you'll go there with them. But I want to finally wrap this up and kind of talk about, before you do that, you got to build honesty, you got to build connections, and you got to build relationships. We've talked about leadership through different voices. Courage connects them all. Courage is the bridge between collaboration and legacy. It really does begin to show you that as we learn about each other, if you go back to the SHIPS framework I've spoken about before, when we take time in the scholarship section of that framework and we learn about each other, we really understand how best to communicate with that person, how to reach that person, and then to build a true partnership. And in that partnership, what we're talking about is how do we move together so that each achieves the goals that they're sought after? Whether you're the leader or you happen to be the team member, it's important to understand that we're in partnership together. And then how about sponsorship? Like I was just saying, instead of diminishing the colleague, what if that leader had promoted the colleague or talked about the colleague or sponsored the colleague and say, hey, since they've done it, I want you to reach out and ask them how they did it. No one likes better than to be lauded for the work that they do than to pick up the phone and say, hey, heard that you had a successful test on this particular technology. Would love to learn what you did so that we don't have to swim through rivers you already did as we're working on something similar. Simple compliment, understanding by learning who they are, partnering genuinely, and then having a sponsor open the door for you can lead to great success for all leaders as we move towards that last piece of the framework of owning it and managing those relationships. The courage to advocate for others is that sponsorship. And without courage, there is no legacy. If we don't lead genuinely, we find ourselves being around the people that are less likely to stay on your team. I learned long ago that people really don't quit organizations for money only. Majority of them quit because of the leader or the lack of leadership. So let me ask you something. Where's courage being required of you right now in your organization? Is it a decision that you've been delaying? A conversation you've been kind of avoiding? Or a standard that you need to reinforce? It can show up in many ways. Leadership doesn't wait for the perfect moment. It responds to the present one. And what I really want you to take away from this is your legacy will be written by the work that you do. I've been honored many times for the work that my team did. The best story that I want to share with you about was this was instilled in me many a year ago when I was a young Lance Corporal back in about 1982. When I met Captain Dempsey Stowers, who had a chest full of ribbons on his short sleeve shirt when I was in the Corps. And I was kind of admiring him. I have to admit, when you saw this display, you couldn't help but admire it. And Captain Stowers took a young E3 over to the side and said, "Hey, I know I saw you looking at these, but let me tell you something. I didn't earn a one of them." Now, you had to imagine that caught me off guard because I figured I'm new to the Marine Corps and everybody earns the ribbons and things that they wear. He said, "I want you to know that the men that I led, their actions, because I had the honor of leading them, is why I wear these ribbons. It's why I have these medals." Boy, that was powerful. You need to know that Captain Stowers was a Vietnam era veteran and had just been an incredible leader and would go on to lead many, many years. We've lost him now, and God rest his soul. But he poured into a young kid in Pensacola, Florida, the desire to be that type of leader. He also shared with me, Allie, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. When you get out in the fleet and you begin to lead other Marines, take the time to assess what's going on before you start changing things. Lead with integrity. Make sure that you model the behaviors of our leadership principles. And one that I carried forward all the way till this day is to lead by example. And then the way that you make sure you check that is to know yourself and seek improvement. By investing in leadership courses and in leadership training, I hope I've honed my skills and I've got to see some of the rewards. But folks, I will tell you that leadership is about learning. And you got to have the courage to continue to learn, continue to be the best that you can be. Another master sergeant told me that be careful calling yourself a subject matter expert. That means you're old and dated. Coming again from another seasoned Vietnam era vet, as you can see, the gray hair is real, folks. I'm in my 60s now, but I'm here to tell you the lessons that I've learned over this career, from Marine to corporate leader, whether it was at Disney, Mayo Clinic, or other organizations. I've had the pleasure of bringing along that book of knowledge that has helped me to be the leader that I aspire to be. And I'm constantly working to pour into it. The truth is, the legacy isn't built at the end of leadership. It's built in moments like these. The Dempsey Stowers, the Master Sergeant conversations in critical places. It's caring about people and being shown that people care about you, and having the courage to push others up to achieve the ultimate goals of the organization or the assignment. Moments where courage show up quietly and consistently and without applause. As I bring this to a close, I want to say, invest in yourself. Develop the courage, the integrity, the business acumen, the ability to lead by taking courses, reading books, polishing your skill set. And most importantly, folks, the 3 L's that you'll hear me talk about, learn how to really listen and apply the 3 A's, having the right attitude, coming in with an open mind and listening to the conversation, adjusting along the way, and then making sure that you give your full attention to the person who's speaking at the time and listen to hear, not to respond. When we do that, we can learn from the conversation, the second L. When you learn from that conversation, then you can take action. As I told you before, leadership is action, it's movement. It's not stagnation. It's not paralyzation. When you learn from the conversations that you have with your subordinates as well as your leaders, you then can be a part of the solution by leaning in and making a difference. It's been a pleasure to join you and share a moment of reflection at this juncture. I want you to tune in next week at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday, because I guarantee you we're closing this series out with an incredible conversation about legacy with General Gwen Bingham. And what remains is that we choose to lead with courage. And until then, I ask that you continue to have real conversations, that you continue to be real leaders, because here at Off the Record, the Real Talk podcast, will continue to bring the real talk. I'm Allie Braswell. It's been a pleasure to share with you, reflect a little bit on our series, The Voice of Leadership. I wish you well. I wish you have a great evening, or whenever you listen to this on your favorite podcast, please go out to all of the podcast platforms, download, subscribe, share, tell others about us. And I look forward to seeing you next week when we celebrate and shout out Lieutenant General Gwen Bingham, retired, as we close this series on the Voice of Legacy. Have a good evening.